The silence in the underground poker room was absolute. Like the moment before a blade strikes. Mia Morales stood with her back to the green felt table, her black and white maid uniform making her invisible against the mahogany walls and leather chairs. Her hands trembled as she collected empty glasses, the ice cubes clinking against crystal with a sound too loud, too present, too real. The air hung thick with cigar smoke, blue-gray clouds drifting under the low ceiling where no windows existed, where time itself seemed to stop. $34 in her jacket pocket. That was all she had. The crumpled foreclosure notice pressed against her ribs like her accusation. $35,000. Due in 3 days. The bank would take the house her mother had built before the cancer came. Before the hospital bills that looked like lottery numbers written in black ink. Before Mia learned that grief was expensive and hope was a luxury item for people with money. Margaret Harrington sat at the center of the table, her pearl necklace catching the amber light. A woman who had never worked a shift in her life, whose hands had never held a mop handle, whose closet probably cost more than everything Mia owned. She slid a manila envelope across the felt toward Douglas Hale, a man with cold eyes and a scar running from his temple to his jaw like a map of violence. Mia froze. The photographs inside that envelope were visible as it opened. Young women. Faces she recognized from the news, from missing persons posters taped to telephone poles. Red circles marking their features. Dates written beneath each image like inventory codes for human beings. 2 weeks earlier, Mia had delivered catering to Douglas Hale's warehouse in the Tenderloin. She had heard him speaking to a girl in the loading dock, her voice breaking like it was made of ice. Mia had not stopped. Had not looked. Had told herself it was not her business, not her problem, not her life to risk. But she had heard his words clearly through the metal door. If you disappear tonight, nobody will even know to look for you. Douglas Hale's eyes lifted from the table and locked directly onto hers. 1 second. 2. Recognition flickered across his face like a match being struck. She had seen him before. He had seen her. Her throat closed. The click of a lighter echoed through the room as someone lit a cigar. The bodyguards shifted position, their shoes scraping against marble. Every sound became a weapon. Every shadow became a threat. Mia turned back to the bar and continued collecting glasses with hands that no longer felt connected to her body. In the private booth above the poker room, positioned in darkness where no one could see him unless they knew exactly where to look, Luca observed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes like winter storm clouds. His tailored suit cost more than a used car. The Rolex on his wrist was worth $30,000. He watched everything, the envelope, Margaret Harrington's satisfied expression, Douglas Hale's predatory smile. And he watched the invisible girl in the maid uniform whose hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped a glass. He had not looked away from her in 47 seconds. Vinny, his lieutenant, stood beside him in the shadows. A man with thick shoulders and a neck like concrete. Even Vinny could sense the shift in the room's atmosphere, could feel the way his boss had gone absolutely still. Luca had been still like this once before, 5 years ago, on the night they had learned about the betrayal. On the night Luca's own brother had turned evidence against the entire Bianchi organization to the Castellano family. That stillness meant someone was about to disappear. But Mia did not know any of this. She carried the glasses toward the bar and thought about the number 35,000. She calculated how many shifts it would take. How many homes she could clean, how many bathrooms she could scrub on her hands and knees, how many times she could swallow her pride and accept a $2 tip from someone who looked through her like she was made of glass. The math never worked. It never had. At that same hour, 3 blocks away on Highway 101, the blizzard was beginning. Snow fell thick and deliberate, burying the city in white silence. The wind picked up speed, cutting through the Bay Bridge cables with a sound like 1,000 knives being sharpened. Mia would not know about the storm yet. She would not know that in exactly 4 hours, her car would break down on that highway. That her phone would die at 3% battery. That the convoy of black SUVs would appear through the white wall of snow like a hallucination. That everything would change in the time it takes to breathe. But the story does not begin with the blizzard. It begins with a debt. 2 weeks before that night in the underground poker room, Mia had stood in the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital, filling out paperwork with a pen that kept slipping in her sweating hands. Her mother, Elena Morales, lay in room 317 on the 3rd floor, and the cancer had returned. The doctors had used words like aggressive and stage 4 and palliative care. They had not used the word cure. The hospital bill grew like a plant that never stopped growing. Surgery, $23,000. Chemotherapy, $4,000 per session. Radiation, $8,000. Medications for pain that made her mother sleep like she was already gone, already floating toward wherever dead people went. Mia had taken a 3rd job. She cleaned offices at night, delivered food at dawn, and worked the evening shift at a restaurant where the customers did not tip and the owner yelled at her for folding napkins wrong. Her hands had developed calluses on top of calluses. Her back curved like a question mark from leaning over bathtubs and bending into cabinets. She slept for hours a night. Sometimes 3. Sometimes she did not sleep at all. The foreclosure notice had arrived on a Tuesday. Mia had opened the envelope with her mother's mail still in the hospital, had read the numbers, and had gone into the bathroom stall at the restaurant where she worked and sat on the closed toilet seat and did not cry. She had learned not to cry. Tears required energy, and energy was something she could not afford to waste. Now, in the underground poker room, she carried the glasses to the bar and set them down with the gentleness of someone who understood that one wrong move, one sound too loud, could shatter everything. The bartender, a man with a scarred face, nodded at her briefly. "You're done here," he said. "Go." Mia did not ask questions. She hung her apron on the hook, collected her payment, $42 for 6 hours of work, less than her hourly rate, but this was under the table, cash only, no questions asked, and walked toward the exit. Her eyes did not lift toward the booth where Luca Bianchi watched her leave. Did not catch the way he leaned forward slightly, the way his jaw tightened. Did not see Vinny exchange a glance with Sal, his other lieutenant, a glance that meant something had shifted, something was moving, something dangerous was beginning to turn. Before we continue with what happens when the blizzard arrives, when Mia's car breaks down and her phone dies and a man steps out of the darkness who is more powerful and more dangerous than she can possibly imagine, I need to tell you something about this story. If this is hitting you, if you can feel what's coming, drop a like right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because the next 72 hours will change Mia's life in ways she cannot predict. Now let us go back. Back to 3 weeks before the poker room, before the blizzard, before she met Luca Bianchi. Back to the morning when everything was still impossible and she was still counting $34 in her pocket like it was a miracle. Because this is not a story about a girl being saved. This is a story about what happens when someone finally decides she is worth saving. Highway 101 stretched north of San Francisco like a tomb of white, the blizzard so complete that day and night had become the same colorless thing. The snow fell in sheets thick enough to swallow sound itself. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. The digital clock on Mia Morales' dashboard read 11:48 p.m. when the engine made a sound like a dying animal and then nothing at all. She sat in the darkness. The heat was already draining from the cabin. Her breath came out in clouds that hung in the cold air like ghosts she could not shake away. Mia wore her delivery uniform under a thin jacket that had belonged to her mother before the cancer took her 6 months ago. The jacket still held the faint smell of the lavender detergent her mother used, and sometimes, on nights like this, Mia would press the fabric to her face and try to remember what it felt like to be held by someone who loved her unconditionally. But there was no time for that now. There was never time. Her phone lit up with a notification. 3% battery remaining. The screen cast a sickly glow across her face. She looked at her hands. They were shaking, not just from the cold but from something deeper, something that had been living in her chest for months. The trembling of someone running out of options. She reached for her purse on the passenger seat. Her fingers found the envelope. The envelope that contained the notice, the the one written in official language that translated to, "Your life is ending." The bank was taking the house. The house that her mother had built with her own hands after her father died. The house that was all Mia had left of her, and in 72 hours, 3 days, it would belong to strangers. The foreclosure notice said $35,000. $35,000. Mia opened her wallet. $34 lay there in crumpled bills. $1 short of nothing. She had been counting this same money for 3 weeks, hoping somehow it would multiply, hoping somehow the universe would take pity on her. It had not. It would not. She counted aloud, her voice cracking on each number like she was saying a prayer to a God she no longer believed in. 30. 31. 32. 33. 34. The wind howled against the car. The snow accumulated on the windshield until the glass was completely white, completely opaque, completely alone. She was sealed inside a box of ice and darkness. Her phone was at 3%. She could call 911. She could call a tow truck. But a tow truck meant money she did not have. An ambulance meant a bill that would follow her for years. She had already learned not to ask for help. Help was something that came with a price tag attached to the bottom, a price tag that grew and grew until it swallowed you whole. So she Saturday. And she waited. And she counted her breath coming in and out, trying to remember if she had eaten that day. She had not. Had she eaten the day before? She could not remember. The hunger had become so familiar that its absence would have been stranger than its presence. The temperature on the dashboard read 19 degrees. At 12:06 a.m., headlights appeared in the distance like two eyes opening in the darkness. Not just headlights. Multiple lights, approaching in formation, sweeping through the white wall of snow with precision and power. The sound came first, the engine rumble of vehicles built for weight and control. Then the shapes resolved. 5 black SUVs, each one identical, each one the size of a small room, pulled over on the shoulder of the highway in perfect parallel spacing. Mia's heart accelerated. This was bad. This was the kind of thing that happened before things got worse. She had heard stories about deserted highways, about women alone, about the kinds of things that happened when no one was watching. She locked the car doors. Her hand found the pepper spray on her key ring, that small useless object she kept like a talisman. The rear door of the center vehicle opened. A man stepped out into the blizzard without hesitation. He was tall, at least 6'3", with shoulders that moved under his coat like a predator's shoulders, controlled and deliberate. His hair was dark with silver threading through it, swept back from a face that held both beauty and terrible severity. He wore a cashmere coat, charcoal gray, the kind that cost more than Mia made in a month. His hands were bare, and she could see a gold watch on his left wrist as he moved. This was Luca Bianchi, though Mia did not know that yet. She did not know that the man walking toward her car was the most powerful organized crime figure in 3 states. She did not know that his word could end careers, end lives, end entire family bloodlines. She only knew that the way he moved, the way he held himself, the way the wind seemed to bend around him rather than move through him, meant that whatever was about to happen, she could not stop it. 2 men emerged behind him, flanking him with military precision. The first was broad-shouldered with a scar running from his left cheekbone to his jaw, a scar that looked like a reminder of violence survived. This was Vinny, Luca's most trusted lieutenant for 19 years. The second was Lena, with watchful eyes that missed nothing, a man who had learned early in life that attention to detail was the difference between living and dying. This was Sal, who had worked for Luca since he was 23 years old and had never once questioned an order. Vinny and Sal exchanged a glance as Luca approached the car. In 19 years of working for him, in 19 years of watching him command empires and destroy enemies and move through the world like he owned it, they had never seen him stop for anyone. They had never seen him break formation for anything except a summons from the 5 families. But what they did not know, what was happening in the lead SUV while they processed this unprecedented moment, was that this was not actually the boss's choice at all. Mia cracked the window 3 inches. The cold rushed in like water, like she was drowning in it. "You will freeze to death out here," the man said. His voice was accented, each word measured and final as a sentence handed down from a judge. She did not open the window further. "I called a tow truck," she said. The lie came automatically, born of a lifetime of trying to make herself smaller, less troublesome, less likely to be noticed by people who had power. "In this storm, they will not arrive until morning. By morning, your body temperature will have dropped below 90 degrees. You will lose consciousness. You will die." He said this without cruelty, not with threat, but with the simple certainty of someone stating a medical fact. The forecast. The inevitability. Vinny was already moving toward the rear SUV, pulling the door open. "Boss, come back inside. The road is not safe." But the man ignored him. His eyes had moved past Mia's window to something beyond it, some measurement he was making with his gaze. "Your name?" "MMIA, she stammered. "Mia Morales." "Open the door, Mia Morales. You will come with us." Behind him, the lead SUV opened, and a woman emerged. She was 74 years old with hair like silver and eyes that contained the fierce, uncompromising intelligence of someone who had survived heartbreak and tyranny and loss. This was Rosa Bianchi, Luca's mother, returning from a medical appointment in the city. She moved toward them despite Vinny's immediate protest, her small frame cutting through the snow with the determination of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Cosa stari aspettando?" Rosa called in Italian. "What are you waiting for?" She reached Mia's car and pulled the door open herself, and the cold and wind and snow all rushed in at once. "Vieni. Come. You will catch pneumonia sitting here like a fool." Mia looked at this small woman, this woman who moved with an authority that made even the large men step back. Mia thought about her mother, about Rosa's age and kindness and the commanding tone that suggested she had spent 74 years expecting the world to accommodate her wishes. She thought about the fact that she was going to die on this highway if she did not move, that her mother's house would be seized by the bank, that there was no rescue coming that did not arrive in the form of men with black SUVs who appeared like ghosts in the blizzard. She stepped out of the car. Her legs were numb, and she nearly fell, but strong hands caught her, and she was swept into the warmth of the middle SUV before she could process what was happening. Rosa wrapped a cashmere blanket around her shoulders, the kind of blanket that cost more than Mia's entire monthly rent. A thermos was pressed into her shaking hands, filled with coffee so hot it burned her palms, but the pain was almost pleasurable because it meant she could still feel something other than cold. "What is your name, Bambina?" Rosa asked, settling beside her on the leather seat. Leather so soft it felt like skin. "Mia. Mia Morales." "Where were you going on a night like this?" "Work," Mia whispered. "I had a delivery shift that ended early, and I was trying to get home." Rosa studied her face with the intensity of a woman reading a text written in a language she had mastered long ago. She turned her head, and through the tinted window, she could see her son standing in the snow, talking to Vinny, his coat already dusted with white. A look passed across Rosa's face, something knowing and ancient and certain. The convoy began to move. The engines rumbled beneath them, powerful and sure, and the highway and the snow and the place where Mia's car still sat, abandoned and frozen, disappeared behind them. Mia did not know that Rosa Bianchi had decided, in that single moment, that her son's trajectory had been all wrong. That he had spent too many years in darkness. That he needed something light, something good, something worth protecting. She did not know that Rosa had already begun the machinery of change, had already begun the process of redemption, all because a young woman with kind eyes and calloused hands had been left to freeze on the side of a highway. The Marina District mansion emerged through the snow 23 minutes later, a fortress of stone and glass and old money, lights glowing in the darkness like a beacon calling something lost back home. And in that moment, suspended between the frozen highway and the warmth of the car, Mia felt something shift. Some small, dangerous, fragile thing that felt almost like hope, though she did not want to name it that, did not want to speak it aloud and watch it shatter like everything else she had ever hoped for. What she did not understand yet was that this night, this impossible night in the blizzard, was the moment everything would begin to change. The morning light filtered through the mansion windows like liquid gold, and Mia stood in the center of the vast library, holding a dust cloth that weighed nothing and felt like everything. 2 weeks had passed since the blizzard. 2 weeks of invisible work in a world of visible wealth. The foreclosure notice sat in her jacket pocket, folded into a shape so small it had nearly disappeared, but the number on it had not changed. $35,000. 3 days remaining. She moved between the mahogany shelves, each book spine more expensive than her monthly rent, and did not notice when Luca appeared in the doorway. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than her mother's medical bills, or it would have, if she still had those bills to pay. If she still had her mother at all. The thought moved through her like a knife, and she steadied herself against a shelf. "You work too much." His voice arrived before she turned, deep and solid like an oath, carrying an accent that thickened only when he was not thinking about it. "My mother says you refuse the guest quarters. You commute 2 hours each way." Mia kept her eyes on the books. "I prefer to go home." "To what?" The question was not cruel. It was worse. It was curious, as if he genuinely wanted to understand the shape of her desperation. She turned then. Luca Bianchi stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and there was something almost gentle about him in the morning light, before the evening came and brought the men and the money and the violence that moved like shadows through this house. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the broad shoulders of someone born to carry weight. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that would have been handsome if it were not so carefully controlled. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, pale against his olive skin. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and impossible to read. "I have a home," Mia said quietly. "You have a building the bank is about to take." His eyes did not move from hers. "Rosa told me." Heat flooded Mia's face. She turned back to the books, dust cloth moving in mechanical patterns. "I do not accept charity. I did not offer any." He stepped into the library, and the space between them seemed to contract. "I am offering you employment. You are already earning money. I want to increase it. That is a business transaction, not mercy." The footsteps of his men echoed in the hallway outside, Vinny and Sal, always present, always watching. Guards. Or perhaps the word was different in Italian. Capis. Understand. "Why?" Mia asked. "Because my mother likes you. Because you do not flinch when you see how I live. Because you work without complaint in a house where the walls are thicker than your apartment building is tall." He paused. "And because I am curious about a woman who counts coins while surrounded by men who think numbers in millions." Mia's hand stilled. She had not realized anyone noticed her morning ritual, arriving at 6 in the morning, sitting in the kitchen for 10 minutes before Rosa came down, adding up the previous day's wages on a piece of scrap paper, dividing the total by 35,000, calculating how many days remained. The mathematics of survival. The arithmetic of impossible things. "What kind of employment?" she asked. "Household management. My mother's companion during the day. Light work. The pay is $200 per day." The world tilted. $200. Times 30, that was $6,000 per month. But she only needed $35,000 total. She could save it in 3 months. She could save it in less. "I accept," she said, and did not recognize her own voice. Luca smiled then, and it changed his entire face. "Rosa said you would. She told me to tell you that you are no longer nobody, and that starting today, you work for her, not for me, and that she expects you in the kitchen at 7 for proper Italian breakfast." Then he was gone, leaving only the sound of his footsteps and the whisper of his suit against the air. The first week established a rhythm that became almost beautiful in its regularity. Mia arrived at 6, before the household woke. She sat in the kitchen where Rosa had already begun the coffee, real coffee, not the watered-down bitterness she made for herself at home from grounds she saved and reused until they were nearly white. Rosa's kitchen smelled like possibility. Like cinnamon and honey and the kind of love that expressed itself in food instead of words. Eat. Rosa pressed a plate into her hands before 7 each morning. Fresh pastries, scrambled eggs with herbs Mia could not name, fruit arranged like a still life. Rosa herself barely ate anything, but she watched Mia with the intensity of a woman conducting an experiment in resurrection. By 8, Mia was cleaning. The mansion required it. 5 stories. 23 rooms. Marble hallways that echoed with the weight of old money. She moved through the spaces like a ghost, keeping her uniform black and white, 3 sizes too large, held at the waist with safety pins, clean and invisible. The household staff treated her like furniture. The chef did not speak to her except to give orders. The groundskeeper looked through her as if she were not there. But there were moments when the mask cracked. One afternoon, she was replacing fresh flowers in the formal dining room when she heard voices from the study next door. Men's voices. Low. Dangerous. The kind of dangerous that made your spine feel like it might splinter from the inside out. The Castellano operation is moving product through the port. This from Vinny, recognizable by the slight rasp in his voice. They are undercutting our prices by 15%. Luca, we need to respond. Silence. Then Luca's voice, measured and absolute, let them cut. They are establishing market presence. We let them believe they are succeeding, and then we move. Never show your hand until the moment of greatest damage. That is strategy. That is patience. Another voice, which Mia would learn was Sal's, your brother would have. The room went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that arrived like a slap. My brother is dead to me. Luca's words were so quiet they barely traveled through the wall. If you speak his name again, you will follow him. The conversation shifted to money, envelope numbers, percentages, dates written in a shorthand that meant nothing to Mia. But she understood enough. Whatever lived in this mansion, whatever moved through these rooms in expensive suits and carried guns beneath perfectly tailored jackets, it was not legitimate. It was not clean. She continued arranging flowers, her hand steady, her heart performing a complicated rhythm inside her chest. 3 days later, Rosa summoned her to the master bedroom. The older woman sat on the edge of an enormous bed draped in cream silk, and she looked smaller than she had in the kitchen. Frailer. The light from the bay window caught the silver in her hair and made her look like something fragile enough to shatter. Come. Sit. Rosa patted the space beside her. Mia sat, maintaining a professional distance, but Rosa reached over and took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft and covered in age spots like a map of all the years she had survived. My son does not speak of his past, Rosa began. But you have lived in this city long enough to know that Bianchi is not a name people say aloud without fear. You know what that means. Mia said nothing. My younger son, Marco, Luca's brother, he made a choice 15 years ago. He believed he could work for 2 families, that he could tell secrets to the Castellano organization and still keep his life. Rosa's hand tightened around Mia's. He was wrong. Luca had to choose between mercy and survival. He chose survival. He chose to become a man that no one questions, no one defies. He chose to be someone so dangerous that his family would be protected through fear instead of love. The bay window framed the San Francisco skyline in its enormity. Somewhere out there, in those buildings and streets, there were people like Luca. People who made choices that locked them in darkness. Why are you telling me this? Mia whispered. Because my son is looking at you the way he has not looked at anything in 5 years. With something that is not quite hope, but is reaching toward it. Rosa released her hand. And I am telling you that if you look back at him that way, you need to understand what he is. What he has done. What darkness he carries like a cross. That night, Mia could not sleep. She lay in her apartment, a studio in the Mission District with walls thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through them, and thought about Rosa's words. She thought about Luca's scarred face and his careful control and the absolute certainty in his voice when he said things like "they will follow him." She thought about what it meant to carry darkness. What it cost. She counted her wages again. She had $3,600 now. $1,400 remained. 5 weeks of work, if nothing changed, if she did not make any mistakes, if Luca did not decide she was someone to erase. But what she did not understand yet was what was about to change everything. The underground room revealed itself to her on a Thursday evening, when Luca asked her to help prepare for a private game. She descended a staircase hidden behind a mahogany panel, down into a space beneath the mansion that felt like descending into the truth of who Luca Bianchi really was. The room was vast. Carpeted in deep green felt. 3 poker tables arranged with geometric precision. Art on the walls that she recognized from news articles about stolen works. Lighting that was somehow both intimate and clinical. Guards stood at 2 doors, armed in a way that made it clear they were not part of the game. Margaret Harrington arrived with 3 other people, and Mia's breath caught in her throat. Margaret was everything Mia was not, 63 years old but carrying it like wealth, silver hair perfectly arranged, pearls at her throat that probably had their own insurance policy. Her dress cost more than Mia's apartment's annual rent. Her shoes alone could have paid the mortgage for 2 months. Margaret did not see Mia. She saw only what was useful, and she signaled needs with the flick of her fingers, speaking to Mia as though she were a disembodied service arm with no ears attached. More wine. The good stuff. Not the swill I am sure you served last time. Mia poured, her hand steady, her face empty. Douglas Hale arrived at 9 o'clock, and Mia recognized him immediately. Mid-40s, expensively dressed in a way that screamed newly wealthy, the kind of money that had not learned to be quiet yet. She had seen him before, 2 weeks ago, in an office that overlooked the bay. She had delivered him Chinese food while he was signing papers with a young woman who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. He and Margaret greeted each other with the easy comfort of conspirators. Mia kept her head down. She moved between the tables, pouring wine, clearing glasses, remaining invisible. But at one point, near the private booth where Luca sat watching the games with the expression of someone calculating probabilities no one else could see, she drifted close to where Douglas and Margaret spoke in hushed tones. "The next shipment is ready," Douglas said. His voice carried the particular cruelty of a man who had discovered that other people's desperation was profitable. 6 girls. All signed. All documented. Margaret smiled. And the destination? Manila first. Then distribution through the network. The buyers are paying premium for American girls. The younger ones especially. Douglas handed her an envelope. Your usual percentage. The proceeds go to whatever charity you want to front this month. Margaret opened it. Photographs. Red circles around faces. Dates written beneath in careful handwriting. Girls who were probably someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's hope in the dark. Mia's hands went numb. The wine glass slipped, caught against her apron before it could shatter. She steadied it, forced her breathing to remain normal, and every nerve ending in her body screamed at her to run. But Margaret's eyes snapped up. They were the color of winter, and they locked onto Mia's face with the precision of a weapon targeting. You. Girl. More wine. And bring some proper champagne this time. This is pedestrian. Yes. The words came out as though they belonged to someone else, someone brave, someone whose hands were not shaking. Mia retreated to the bar, and when she looked back, Douglas Hale was staring at her. Not at her face, but at her, as if he were trying to remember where he had seen this particular piece of furniture before. "Do I know you?" he asked. The room seemed to compress around her. Every breath required conscious effort. "No, sir," she said. "You look familiar." His eyes narrowed. Then recognition flickered across his face like a switch being thrown. "Ah. You delivered food to my warehouse. 2 weeks ago. The afternoon I was reviewing contracts." Mia nodded, saying nothing, because anything she said might give away the fact that she had heard what he said to that girl. That she had understood, even then, though she had told herself she did not, that she could not afford to understand. "Small world," Douglas said, and smiled in a way that was not a smile at all. "Be careful walking home at night, Miss Morales." Her voice came from very far away. "Miss Morales. The city can be so dangerous for young women alone." Mia excused herself, moved back to the kitchen, and stood with her hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard her nails left crescents in her palms. In the underground room, games continued. Money exchanged hands. Laughter echoed off the concrete walls. And somewhere in that sound was the business of disappearing people. The mechanism of making girls vanish into darkness so complete that no one would ever think to look for them. She did not notice when Luca appeared in the kitchen doorway. Did not realize he had been watching her, observing the moment when she understood what Douglas Hale truly was, and more importantly, what Margaret Harrington was. Did not see the way Vinny and Sal exchanged a glance when their boss stood absolutely still, his hand forming a fist at his side, his jaw set so tight it might crack. Did not know that in that moment, Luca Bianchi had decided that both Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington had made a very serious mistake. They had let themselves become visible to someone worth protecting. The footsteps of his men echoed through the hallway as they returned upstairs, the sound of justice beginning to wake. "You came to me instead of the police." Those words hung in Luca's office like a confession neither of them had planned to make. Mia stood with her arms wrapped around herself, rain still dripping from her jacket onto his marble floor, leaving small dark stains that looked like tears the building itself was crying. Luca sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled together, his dark eyes boring into her with the intensity of a man accustomed to reading lies in other people's faces and finding none in his own. Behind him, the city sprawled across 37 floors of glass and steel. Somewhere out there, Douglas Hale was still breathing. Somewhere, Margaret Harrington was still sleeping in her silk sheets, untouched by consequence. The fluorescent lights hummed, a sound like electricity itself holding its breath. "The police will do nothing," Mia said, her voice steadier now than it had been on the pier. "These are rich, connected people preying on women nobody cares about. The system will not save them." She looked directly at him. "But you can." Vinny shifted his weight. Sal's jaw tightened. They exchanged a glance that lasted exactly 2 seconds, the kind of silent communication that only develops between men who have spent years moving through darkness together, understanding when the darkness is about to move through them. Luca stood slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at San Francisco Bay, where the pre-dawn light was just beginning to crack the black sky like an egg. When he spoke, his voice was deep and solid like an oath. "You understand what you are asking me to do?" "Yes. And you understand that once I do it, there is no going back. You will be part of this. Forever." Mia thought of the 6 girls locked in a container. She thought of the police doing nothing. She thought of her mother, who had fought cancer with her fists and her prayers and her absolute refusal to surrender, even when the pain was so bad she could not lift her head from the pillow. She thought about auditioning that fight by choosing safety over justice. "Those girls do not have time for me to stay innocent," she said. Luca turned from the window. His scar, running from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone like a line drawn through his history, caught the light and seemed to glow. When he smiled, it was cold and dark and final, like a coffin lid being sealed. "Vinny. Sal. Gather the men. We move in 1 hour." The warehouse on Mission Street sat dark and enormous, a concrete monument to the business of erasing people. 12 men in black moved through the loading dock at 3 in the morning like ghosts that had learned to coordinate their haunting. Their footsteps made no sound. Their breathing was controlled. Each man carried a key that fit the lock on the storage container without any need for persuasion or force. The container door swung open. The smell that emerged was like a blade through the chest, sweat and fear and the chemical stench of human desperation. 6 young women huddled in the darkness, some crying, some too broken to cry anymore. Their eyes adjusted to the light of Vinny's flashlight and widened with terror. They did not know if these men had come to save them or transport them to something worse. Vinny knelt down slowly. His voice, when he spoke to them, was gentle in a way that made clear how dangerous gentleness could be in a man like him. "You are safe now. We are taking you someplace warm. Someplace where nobody will hurt you again." One of the girls, Maria, age 19, from the Philippines, whispered, "Who are you?" "The men who are going to make sure Douglas Hale never does this to anyone ever again." Douglas Hale arrived at his warehouse at dawn and found it empty. Not just the girls gone, everything was gone. The paperwork burned. The shipment manifests erased. The shipping containers cleaned so thoroughly there was no trace of human suffering, no DNA, no evidence that 6 lives had been stored like cargo. He stood in the cavernous space, his expensive shoes echoing on concrete, and understood in that moment that his world had fractured. He ran. The private airfield sat 30 miles north, where millionaires kept their jets fueled and ready for the moment when running became the only option left. Douglas Hale's plane was already warming up, the engines whining like animals in pain. He carried 2 suitcases and a leather portfolio containing $22 million in offshore account numbers, everything he needed to disappear into Mexico City, into a life of exile and paranoia. The tarmac exploded with motion. Black SUVs materialized from the pre-dawn darkness like sharks detecting blood in the water. Sal's team moved with the efficiency of men who had practiced this exact scenario 100 times before. They did not point guns at Douglas. They did not need to. The inevitability of their approach was enough to communicate that resistance was not an option, it was simply an extended version of surrender. Douglas tried to run. His expensive shoes slipped on the wet tarmac. He fell hard, his palms scraping concrete, his portfolio scattering money across the ground like snow. When they grabbed him, he fought with the desperation of a man who understood exactly what darkness was waiting for him. "Please," he gasped, his voice cracking into the whimpering sound of a predator suddenly understanding he was prey. "I have $10 million. $20 million. I can make you rich. I know people. I have connections. I can." "You already made your choice," Sal said quietly, pressing Douglas's face into the tarmac, "the moment you decided those women were merchandise." Douglas Hale collapsed then. His entire body went limp. He trembled like a cornered animal, like something that had lived its entire life believing there were no consequences and had just discovered that the universe kept very careful accounts. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the sun was rising over Pacific Heights, that neighborhood of mansions and old money, where Margaret Harrington was still sleeping in her California king bed with Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than a car payment. Her silk robe hung on an antique chair. Her jewelry box glowed with diamonds that caught the dawnlight and refracted it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The FBI arrived at 6:27 in the morning with 14 agents, 2 vans, and a search warrant that covered 43 pages of financial records, communications, bank transfers, and photographs. They did not break down the door. They used a key, and Margaret's own housekeeping staff had provided it 3 weeks earlier after a quiet conversation with federal investigators. Margaret Harrington woke to the sound of footsteps on her Italian marble floor. By the time she sat up in bed, 2 agents were already in her bedroom, their badges visible, their voices steady and professional as they read her rights. She was arrested in her silk robe, her hair still tousled from sleep, her face suddenly looking older, as if the moment the handcuffs touched her wrists, 20 years of careful preservation collapsed and revealed the hard, cruel woman underneath. The photographers caught everything. Her face as she was led to the FBI vehicle. Her hands cuffed behind her. Her foundation collapsing in real time as news outlets broadcast her arrest every 15 minutes. Her society friends, women who had lunched with her for 30 years, who had served on committees with her, who had celebrated her philanthropy, suddenly had no idea who she was. By noon, her Twitter was deleted. By evening, her foundation announced it was terminating all programs and returning donations. By the next morning, every news channel in California was running the headline, "Prominent philanthropist Margaret Harrington charged with international human trafficking." But Luca's justice went deeper than federal charges. That night, at 11:16 in the evening, two unmarked black vans arrived at the warehouse where Douglas Hale was being held. Mia watched from a distance, standing beside Luca in the shadows, as men she did not recognize, soldiers from the Castellano family, San Francisco's oldest rival organization, stepped out with the kind of purposeful movement that communicated they were not there for conversation. The Castellanos have been hunting for the man supplying girls to their enemies, Luca explained quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They will question him very thoroughly about his suppliers, his routes, his buyers. They will want names, locations, everything. He paused. The wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the bay. Then he will disappear. No trial. No publicity. No chance of appeal or escape. Douglas Hale screamed when they grabbed him. He screamed as they dragged him toward the van. He screamed that he had information, that he could make a deal, that his lawyers would sue them for everything they owned. His screams echoed off the warehouse walls like the final protest of something that had always believed itself untouchable. Then the van doors slammed shut. The sound was like the closing of a door to hell itself. Mia felt Luca's hand find hers in the darkness. His fingers were warm despite the cold night. His grip was steady. "Is it over?" she asked. "For them, yes. Douglas Hale will spend the rest of his life understanding what it means to be someone else's property. Margaret Harrington will spend 40 years in federal prison, her name destroyed, her foundation dismantled, every penny of her wealth seized as restitution. And the girls? Safe. In a house that exists nowhere on any official record. They have counselors. They have lawyers. They have people who will fight for their testimony. In 6 months, they will help convict Margaret Harrington. In a year, some of them will be in college. In 5 years, they will have normal lives." Luca turned to face her directly. His dark eyes caught the moonlight and seemed to glow. "But you, Mia Morales, you cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you know. You are no longer invisible." The rain that had threatened all night finally came, soft and gentle, like the city itself was washing away the blood and darkness. Mia lifted her face to it and felt something inside her break open, not in pain, but in the way a seed breaks when it is ready to grow into something stronger than what contained it before. "I do not want to be invisible anymore," she said. "Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives." 3 weeks had passed since the rain washed the city clean. Margaret Harrington sat in a federal holding cell, her designer clothes replaced with orange scrubs, her foundation dismantled, her name dragged through news cycles that had once celebrated her charity galas. 43 counts. 40 years without parole. The woman who had funded the disappearance of 6 girls would spend the remainder of her life behind bars, her wealth seized, her reputation burned to ash. Douglas Hale was gone. Not dead, not officially. The authorities listed him as a fugitive, his face on wanted posters in post offices from Sacramento to Los Angeles. But Mia knew the truth. Luca had made a call to the Castellano family. Douglas Hale had been delivered to them on a Tuesday night in the back of a van with no windows, and by Wednesday morning, he simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The screams she had heard in the warehouse, they belonged to a man who was learning what it meant to be property, to be powerless, to be invisible. The 6 women were safe. All of them. Living in a house that existed on no official record, receiving counseling from trauma specialists, their testimonies being prepared for the trial that would lock Margaret Harrington away forever. 3 of them had already found work. Mia no longer wore the black and white uniform. Rosa had insisted on burning it, had taken it from the laundry room one morning and placed it in her hands. "You are not a maid anymore," the older woman had said, her voice steady despite the weakness in her heart that the doctors said Mia's quick thinking on that frozen highway had saved. "You are family." Now Mia dined at the table where the Bianchi family gathered. Vinny and Sal greeted her with respect. The household staff whispered about the girl who had become something more, though they could not quite articulate what. The terrace overlooking the bay became hers, a place where she stood in the late afternoon light, watching sailboats move across the water like white birds, and tried to understand how she had arrived here. Luca found her there on a Tuesday, the same day the news announced Margaret Harrington's conviction. He moved beside her without sound, his expensive shoes making no noise on the marble. This was something she had learned about him. He moved like a man accustomed to controlling every element of his environment, including the air itself. "I have been thinking about the night you found me on Highway 101, Mia said, not turning from the view. "That was not chance, was it?" Luca smiled. It was a rare expression on his face, something that changed the architecture of his features completely. "My mother has a gift for recognizing people who need saving. She insisted we stop. She has a weak heart. You could have let her rest in the car. She could have died if the stress had been too much," Luca said. His voice was quiet, like stone speaking to stone. "You kept her calm. You kept her warm. The cardiologist said your quick thinking prevented an event that would have killed her." Mia finally turned to face him. His dark eyes held the light of the bay, and there was something in them that had not been there weeks ago, a softness, like ice that had begun to thaw in a place where ice was supposed to be permanent. "I did not know," she whispered. "I know. That is why I did not tell you." He took her hand. His fingers were warm despite the salt wind coming off the water. "You save people because it is who you are. Not for reward. Not for recognition. You simply save them." "And the loan?" "The $35,000. I investigated the foreclosure the moment you mentioned it. When I saw Douglas Hale's name attached to your mother's property, I knew what he was." Luca's jaw tightened. "I wanted you free of him before I dealt with him. So you saved me first." "We saved each other," he said. "On the worst nights of our lives." The terrace door opened. Rosa emerged, leaning on her cane, and behind her came Emma, 7 years old, with her uncle's dark eyes and a smile that could illuminate entire rooms. The girl ran to Mia without hesitation, without the shyness that had marked their first meetings. "Zia Mia, will you read to me?" Emma asked. "Aunt Mia." A title that had not been given by blood but chosen, earned through presence and care. Mia looked at this family, dark, complicated, dangerous, and absolutely hers. "Yes," she said. Then, to Luca, "We build something worth protecting." Inside, Vinny and Sal stood at their posts, but now they guarded one of their own. The woman who had counted $34 in a blizzard now had wealth beyond money. She had purpose. She had the absolute certainty that she would never face the world alone again. 6 months later, the building where Mia's mother had once run a restaurant reopened. The kitchen remained, but the dining room transformed. Beds were installed upstairs. Counseling offices occupied the second floor. Above the door hung a new sign, hand-painted in Rosa's handwriting, "Rosa's House, a place for second chances." Mia ran it with funding from Luca's organization, his legitimate businesses channeling resources toward women escaping exploitation. On opening day, she stood on the steps in a dress that was not a uniform, that was simply hers, watching the first residents arrive. They carried plastic bags. They had hollow eyes. They trembled when they thought no one was watching. She recognized herself in every single one of them. "You will be safe here," she told them, her voice steady. "You will work. You will heal. You will be visible again, not as victims, not as property, but as women with choices and futures and names that matter." That evening, after the celebration had ended and the residents had been shown to their rooms, Luca found Mia in the office. She sat surrounded by photographs, the 6 women they had saved, Margaret Harrington's mugshot from her federal arrest, updates from the women's healing progress. She was writing a letter to one of them, a girl named Sophia who was starting community college in the fall. "Do you regret it?" Luca asked. "Knowing what you know now? Being part of this world?" Mia thought of the frozen highway. She thought of Douglas Hale's screams echoing through the warehouse. She thought of Margaret Harrington's face when the police arrived with federal warrants, her hands trembling as she was read her rights on live television. She thought of the darkness she had witnessed and, yes, participated in. No, she said. Some forms of salvation arrive not as mercy but as justice. You taught me that. Luca pulled her close. His arms around her felt like a fortress, like a place where the world's cruelty could not reach. And you taught me that justice means nothing if we do not protect the people worth saving. Outside, snow began to fall on San Francisco. Not the vicious blizzard that had nearly claimed her life, but soft, gentle flakes that drifted past the windows of Rosa's house like a benediction. The lights inside burned warm and welcoming for women who had nowhere else to go, women who needed saving the way Mia had once needed saving on a frozen highway in absolute darkness. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a like if you believe in second chances and justice for those who cannot fight for themselves. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that the people who save us are sometimes the ones we saved first, in ways we never knew. Tomorrow, we have another story waiting for you. Until then, remember, sometimes the darkest nights give birth to the brightest mornings. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.